Hey guys, it's Christy and welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me. Today we're going to be reviewing the new Ethereal Eyes eyeshadow palette from Makeup by Mario. So before we get into it, I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel before you leave. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy, and let's get into it. Alright guys, so this is the outer carton. This is the new Ethereal Eyes eyeshadow palette. This retails for $64 US or 85 Canadian, so a very steep price point. This does have a 12-month shelf life. This is also manufactured in the US and assembled in the DR. So those are the details. Now, when I pull this out of the packaging, it is his beautiful, beautiful white classic packaging, very minimal with his name. Most of his products do tend to have a black box and then beautiful white inner packaging, which I love. One thing I will say is that this is very heavy and weighted, which I really do like. And then opening up the palette, this is a beautiful, beautiful color story. So beautiful, very, very neutral, definitely very much my taste. So this describes itself as Mario's dream palette, and his 12 new signature shades create effortless ethereal eye looks, featuring 3 unique finishes in suede mattes, natural metallics, and a glossy shimmer. So I will say these shades don't actually have shade names, they're just labeled EE1, EE2, which is fine. I never actually picked up his Master Mattes, his Master Metallics palette, so this is a new experience for me as well. But let's just dive right on into the palette, and then afterward we will look at some swatches and comparisons. Okay, let's start with EE7, which is just this beautiful pink transition type shade. This is such a pretty, pretty palette. I will say there is a little bit of kick up with the shadows. I have already primed my lids with my MAC paint pot and some translucent powder. I will say the mirror on this palette is also really, really nice. It's kind of just really crisp, if that makes sense. This is a really nice transition, I will say. On my eyes personally, this reminds me of the transition shade from the Natasha Denona Glam Face palette that I love so much. So the shade is definitely very lightly pigmented. It's definitely a more buildable shade, but that's definitely more of the vibe I get from Mario in general. I do really like it though, and it's blending out really nicely, really, really well. I think now I'm going to go into EE4 to deepen the crease. Just sort of lightly stamp this on the outer corner and then start bringing it into my crease as well, but just making sure most of that pigment is deposited on the outer corner. I do think this shade is significantly more pigmented. It's definitely going a lot farther in my opinion, which I'm okay with. The mattes do blend really, really nicely together, I will say that. I'm definitely understanding why he calls them suede mattes. I can definitely see that. I think I just want to go into EE12 as well. Again, just on that outer corner. I'm really just doing this one to test out more shades. That is actually a really nice deepening shade. So now that I've got my base down, I think I want to go into EE6, and I think this is going to be one of his glossy shimmers that are supposed to be completely new to the market. So I'm going to take this on a finger, and then I'm just going to put that all over. Ooh, okay. Oh, wow. That's really pretty. All over the center of the lid. That's really beautiful. I'm just going to blend the crease a little bit more just to kind of... I guess I'm just kind of dragging this out even just a little bit. Okay, I'm definitely seeing what he's saying with that kind of ethereal eyes type of thing. That is really pretty. What happens if I really, really build it? It just gets shinier. That's beautiful. Okay, and I am getting fallout with this. I am doing it with a finger, of course. I do want to try it with a brush just to see what happens. So I'm just going to pick it up with a flat brush. And it looks like it picked up really nicely. I just sprayed my brush with some MAC Fix Plus. Let's see what happens. Ooh. Okay, so I'm thinking a wet brush is probably the way to go. I feel like there's a little bit more sparkle with a finger, but again, there's more fallout, whereas the wet brush had none. Okay, that was really, really pretty. I want to grab another flat brush because I also want to try out EE2. I'm going to put that on the inner corner. So again, I'm going to pick that up with a flat brush. Oh, that's so pretty. Let me pop off camera. I'm going to throw on some mascara and I'll come back and we will look at some swatches and we will also do some comparisons. Let's get into my final thoughts with the new Ethereal Eyes palette. So, one thing I do want to mention, kind of gross, I did find a hair kind of embedded into this shade. It was kind of imperfect at first and I didn't really realize what it was. And then as I was swirling my finger around, I pulled out a hair. So that's kind of gross. But other than that, I think this palette is absolutely beautiful. I really do. I love the look I came out with. I want to try it again so many times just to create some even lighter and brighter looks. This is definitely a palette that is going to be so beautiful all year round. It is a neutral palette. If you are a neutral lover, I really, really think you will love this palette. I think the mattes, they work very well together. I don't think there's anything special about them. I still think a Natasha Denona matte is still creamier. These definitely do have a bit of a soft suede feel, which I enjoyed. I'm just saying, if you prefer a creamier matte, I would say go with your Natasha shadows. Those are definitely smoother. The one metallic you get in here is very, very pretty. I will say it's beautiful. These shades here are stunning. They're very sparkly. They don't carry a ton of pigment underneath them. They don't carry a ton of base. They are much more of like a shimmery top coat. So next time I would use one of the mattes all over the lid as opposed to just in the crease. That's one thing I would do differently. I also want to try it without really deepening up the outer corner. I would love to try a halo eye with this. So those are things I'm definitely going to be doing. I do think these are very, very beautiful. However, this is a very high price point. So I do want to pop up some photos. I did pop off camera. I swatched all of the shades and then I did some comparisons. If you have the Natasha Denona Glam Face Palette in the lighter version, you already have 3 of the mattes that are in this palette. The shimmers were a little bit harder to dupe. The shimmers in Natasha's are definitely more, they're still very sparkly, but they are much more opaque than that in the Makeup by Mario. The Makeup by Mario is definitely a little bit more sparkly but less opaque. And one thing to mention about Mario shimmers is they worked best with a wet brush, and when I went in with my finger I got a lot of fallout. So I would definitely recommend a wet brush just from my experience, but you do already have 3 of the mattes if you have this palette already, and they were very, very close. This was the first palette that came to mind when I first saw the promo for the new Mario palette, so that's one thing I wanted to look at. Then I was kind of reminded of another favorite neutral palette of mine. This is the Lunar Beauty Nude Prism. This one came out earlier this year and it does contain a lot more shades. So this one obviously contains 18 shades, so you definitely get a lot more for your money. And again, I was very close to duping most of the mattes. The shimmers were harder to dupe because the shimmers in Lunar Beauty are definitely much more opaque. These are the smoothest shimmers I have ever dealt with, whereas Mario's, again, definitely a little bit more glittery, more fallout, and not as opaque. So the shimmers were a little bit too hard to dupe, but if you do have this one, again, the mattes in the Mario palette really aren't going to do much for you. So then the next palette I tried to dupe the palette with was the Sigma Spicy palettes. The Sigma palette, definitely a little bit warmer and of course less shades, but we came pretty close on this one. Not as close as I originally thought, and the shimmers in this palette really aren't my favorite formula, but color-wise, again, the matte's pretty similar, but this one's a little bit warmer, so it's not as similar as I thought. And the final palette I did a comparison to was the Natasha Denona Glam palette. Obviously, Glam is definitely a very cool tone color story as opposed to the Mario palette, which is definitely a true neutral. However, I was able to dupe the shimmers with this one. I'll just pop up that photo here as well. So again, Natasha's shimmers are more opaque, but I was able to dupe them. So if you have the Glam palette and the Glam Face palette, I really would not recommend picking this one up if you do have both of those, because you essentially have the palette with that. And I only say that because this is so expensive for 12 shades. While I think this is absolutely stunning, I don't think it's revolutionary. I do think these are really, really pretty, but they are essentially shimmer top coats. However, because I wasn't able to find a true dupe, I was able to get very, very close with the Glam palette. I wasn't able to fully duplicate the palette, so maybe it's worth it to you in that case. I do think if you're looking for a really beautiful neutral palette, if you're somebody who doesn't have a ton of makeup, have a ton of neutral palettes already, you might enjoy this. I'm definitely going to enjoy the sparkle I get from these top coats. I think this is a very, very beautiful palette. I really do. In my opinion, Mario does not do much wrong. I love most of what I have from him. So I really do love his brand. I love his products. I love the aesthetic of his brand. So I'm not surprised that I love this. I will say I don't think the mattes are the best mattes. I think the mattes are a great formula. The metallic seems to be a great formula. The glossy shimmers are also a unique formula. I think they're great. I just don't think the mattes are special compared to, say, a Natasha matte. I don't think they're special, but I think it's a beautiful palette. But overall, I really think this is beautiful. I think it's fairly easy to dupe. The glossy shimmer formula is the hard part. Obviously, the mattes are super easy, but if you do have the Natasha Denona Glam palette and any other neutral palette, I think you can make this work. I think you can easily get a very similar effect. The one shimmer I do think is special is this one right here. This one is it's like a neutral, but it's got like a pinky tone to it, but then I see it's very duochrome and I love it. I think it's very, very pretty. So I think that's the one shade in here that is very, very difficult to find elsewhere in my collection. So overall, I think this is beautiful. I think it's very pricey, so I think if you can get it on sale, do so. I do think it's painfully expensive for what you get, and I think a lot of what you're paying for is the packaging. This is very beautiful, very weighted, heavy packaging. It's very beautiful. So do I think it's super unique? No. Does my neutral heart really love it and plan to use it a ton? Yeah. And then of course, like I mentioned, with those glossy shimmers, you definitely want to, from my experience, it's definitely better to go in with a wet brush. I got a lot of fallout when I used a finger, which is normally my go-to method. I am seeing that on the eye that I used a finger, it's definitely showing a little bit more sparkly. This eye, definitely not as much. There's definitely still sparkle there, just not as much. But that's it. So I think it's a very beautiful palette. However, I think it's fairly easy to dupe. If you're just really, really wanting it and you don't have a ton of makeup, then maybe this is a great splurge. I do think it's a great palette. I don't think anybody would be upset with the quality. It's just really expensive for a palette that's going to be duped so easily. That is it for me today. Thank you so very much for watching. I hope this video was somewhat helpful or encouraged you to look through your own neutral palettes. Let me know down below if you're planning to pick this one up. I love hearing from you guys. If you're new here, I hope you'll consider subscribing before you go. I do upload at least 3 new videos every single week. Thank you again so very much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!